I'm Cheryl Ann Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for those of us who still dare to want it all, who have big dreams and bold ambitions. I think we deserve to have a big, full life and the freedom to enjoy it. So let's design our next chapter together for brilliance, not burnout. Each week, I'll bring ideas, insight, and a fresh perspective to keep you growing into a life that feels as good as it looks. Brilliant Balance, your life, your way. Now let's get started. This is episode 383 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, The Perception Gap, or Why You Don't See Yourself the Way Others See You. So if you are a longtime listener of this show, you may have recognized or noted that there was a brand new intro to the show today that we've debuted, along with some new cover art for the podcast. We are 7 years plus into this podcast, and it's the first time that we've changed the introduction in all of that time. So if you sort of recognize the show by those introductory words, you may hear a bit of an evolution. I think we are still very much connected to the heritage of this show and giving ourselves permission to grow and evolve in the direction that things feel really organically like they're moving. In fact, if anything, I would say this introduction is just catching up with where the brand has already been going. So take a listen. If you skip past it, you'll hear a few new words in there, a few new ideas that I think we're moving more to the forefront of the brand in this chapter. So just a bit of a history lesson. The first 15 years of my adult life are really what I refer to as my corporate chapter. And at the end of 2009, I left my corporate job where I had been for all that time, the same company, and started my first company. So kind of December 2009, started the first company, and then at some point evolved into the second company, sort of shut down the first one, moved into the second one. And the second one is what would go on to become Brilliant Balance. I didn't have the name at the beginning. And the name Brilliant Balance actually came out of a branding exercise that we did when we were starting the podcast. So that's where everything snapped in to focus behind that particular brand name. And that was, again, 7+ years ago. It was October, 7.5 or so years ago. So in all of that time, we've changed the cover art once. This is the second change to the cover art, and had never changed the intro. And so I'm kind of, it feels like a little bit of a refresh, a nice kind of beginning to a bit of a new era for the show. And I'm excited to have you here as a listener and to be along for the ride. I think that if anything in this evolution, what you'll hear is just a little bit maybe more emphasis on the idea of building your future and a little bit less on the idea of managing your current life, right? They're both still very much in there. If you think about the words brilliant and balance, balance was really where I was when I started this brand. I had young children at home. I was in the thick of it in terms of keeping my arms around the management of my day-to-day life. Maybe you're there right now. And so that was the most important thing I was learning, and therefore what I wanted to turn around and teach. And I think while that's still sitting central to the brand, the idea of balance and figuring out how to have a sense of order around your time and your energy, also what is coming online is this idea of designing your next chapter. Really stretching toward what's possible for you, fully embodying your talents, your gifts, and the things that you want to do in the world while you're here. So if we don't have balance, we can't get to brilliance, right? It's like there's something about being able to manage our current circumstances well that gives us the courage, gives us the space to really explore what's next. And I am delighted to be on that ride with you. So today's episode is all about this idea of perception, self-perception, and why we don't see ourselves the way others see us. And I know that'll probably immediately make sense to you I'm sure you're clear that there is some sort of a gap. Because if you've ever been in a conversation where you're getting ready to walk out of the house going, ugh, I look terrible today, and someone says, oh my God, you look great, right? Or it happens in the reverse order where you walk into like Starbucks and somebody says, oh, I love your outfit. And you think, oh, this was not even a good day, right? That's the perception gap at play. And it shows up in so many places. I think the most well-known one, the most common, I don't know if it's the most common, but I think it's the one we talk about a lot, shows up under the label of body dysmorphia, right? If you've ever heard of that diagnosis, it's kind of a debilitating condition in which the individual sees themselves and often a specific part of themselves, like a specific body part, differently than objectively what would be true, and therefore, of course, differently than anyone else would see it. So people with body dysmorphic disorder will often experience like this extreme disconnect between their own self-perception of that particular part of their body and how other people perceive it. So it isn't always generalized to like their full appearance. It often really hones in on one thing that they think is particularly ugly or misshapen or not acceptable in some way. So I think body dysmorphia is something that in the whole world of eating disorders, which a lot of us have heard a lot about as women, I think, and a lot of us have experienced a lot about as women, this body dysmorphic disorder is kind of a subset that lives within that arena. Okay. But it doesn't only happen in bodies, right? We can see it where we're watching somebody just obsess about a particular body part that we know they're over fixated on, but it happens in other areas of life. Think about capability, right? Where maybe you have a friend or a child or a spouse who perceives their own intellect or their communication skills or even like their athletic capability as not very good. And everyone around them is like, there's nothing notable here, right? There's no notable deficit in your athletic ability, your communication skills, your intellect. I had a colleague at one point who really had been damaged by a parent who had told them that every time you open up your mouth, something stupid comes out. And that kind of scar sits so deeply in our identity that it can cause this type of perception gap, right? We have perception gaps around the level of power or influence that we have in the world, right? I think a lot of us see ourselves as not very powerful, not very influential. And we don't realize that that power and influence is right there for us to leverage, right? To be the change that we really want to see in the world. We can have these perception gaps around our own wealth or affluence, right? We have a culture of just never enough. And we're so prone to what's called up comparing, right? Where we're comparing ourselves to somebody who's ahead, that we lose sight of where we actually stand in the grand scheme of things in terms of wealth. I mean, you only have to go look at global data around affluence and wealth to quickly understand where you might fall in a much broader perspective in terms of wealth or affluence. And even within a narrower definition, I think we have a skewed perception broadly that everyone is doing better than we are, right? Where are they getting all of this money? How are they managing to have so much more, to be so much more affluent than we are? So affluence and wealth is another arena. And another one where I see this gap show up is likability, right? We don't think we're very likable or very lovable. It can cause things like social anxiety, right? It can cause us to not feel very confident, to play small. We think everyone else has this kind of magnetism and likability factor that we just don't have. And if you take that full collection, if you think about your sense of your physical self, like your body and your perception of your appearance, your perception of your capability, what you can and can't do, of your own level of influence or power, of your affluence or wealth, and of your likability, if you pick any one of those, much less several of them, we can end up in a real pickle where we could be living such bigger, more robust lives than we are if we could only catch up our own perception with the way the rest of the world is seeing us. Okay. So it makes me sad when I see it or when I experience it, because I certainly do as well. And I thought what might be helpful about today is to talk about some of the causes of this gap. Why does it happen? And also look at what it causes us to do. What are kind of the behaviors that we engage in when we are stuck in this perception gap? And then, of course, I want to give you a little bit of a way through. Okay. So first, let's look at the causes. I referenced one of these a minute ago. One of the biggest causes of this perfection gap is that, or not, there's a Freudian slip, right? Perception gap is that we are stuck in the past. Somewhere along the way, there's like a version of us, a chapter of our identity, and we are connecting our current sense of self to that previous chapter. So I was mentioning at the top of the episode kind of some of the professional chapters that I've walked through, right? And you can imagine that when you go from 15 years in a corporate career, that's part of your identity, right? I very much saw myself in that way. When I moved into entrepreneurship, I did not quickly catch up my identity to that of a business owner. And it showed up in all kinds of ways, right? I was behaving like someone who had a boss in a corporation with the certain kind of expectations that came with that. You know, I famously was like, okay, I have to be up and dressed and at my desk at this exact time. I have to stay there until this exact time, right? Taking days off, I had kind of a very rigid thinking about, not because I had to, but because my identity was really stuck in this past identity. You know, I mentioned a former colleague who someone in their life had said such a cruel thing to them that it shaped their identity. Maybe you have someone in your life that you can think about who gave you a message about your capability or your body or your likability that kind of haunts you, right? You carry it around with you. And I promise you, if that message is stuck, it is impeding your ability to really be the person you have already become, to even embody the person you've already become, much less move to the next level. Okay, so those old life experiences or old messages can really keep us stuck in the past and not able to catch up. I want to talk to all my fellow business owners and introduce you to my friends at Mackie. They are experts in providing CFO services that give you the clarity and confidence that you need, not only to succeed, but to make those strategic decisions that transform your business. Listen, running a business can be stressful, and trust me, I get it. You always want more time away from work to do the things you love, but you also want more profit. And that's where Mackie comes in with their full service financial, accounting, and executive guidance. With their Prosper for Business system, you'll have a trusted partner by your side, combining strategic planning, data analysis, and goal setting to help you grow further, better, and faster. And their results speak for themselves. Mackie's clients experience an average first-year profit increase of over 100%, and business owners report a 20% increase in time freedom. So start your journey to prosper today. Visit mackieadvisors.com/brilliant balance and book your consultation. Okay, balance builders, any chance you're feeling a little overwhelmed by your overloaded schedule? I know, I've been there. In fact, it's why I created 14 Days to Calendar Control. This is my step-by-step program where I share my personal system and set of tools to help you transform your chaotic weeks into easy breezy ones. Okay, maybe not easy breezy, but at least edited and organized. Listen, there's training, templates, and tools in there to help you get things under control quickly. Say goodbye to constant conflicts and chronic rushing, and say hello to calendar control. Curious? Head to brilliant-balance.com/calendar for instant access. That's brilliant-balance.com/calendar. Now back to the show. A second cause of this perception gap is if you have a tendency toward perfectionism or really high standards, that can make you more likely to be susceptible to this perception gap. Okay. The negative self-talk that comes with perfectionism and high standards can be really loud. And if you are somebody who knows, you know that you're prone to perfectionism in particularly any one of those vectors of your life, you are more than likely experiencing some kind of perception gap. Why? Because your standard is so high, right? What you are comparing yourself to is very high. And other people who are considering you, right, and looking at kind of your overall image are not holding you to that high of a standard. We often hold ourselves to a higher standard than anyone else. It's what causes that up comparing that I was describing, right? We're saying like, I have the most unattainable role model that I am trying to be just like. I'm trying to keep up with this person. And we're losing sight of the big picture. I think that perfectionism and high standards can also cause like us to be kind of myopic in the way that we look at ourselves. We're really honed in on the area where we're not measuring up instead of the big picture. Right? If you think about, I mentioned body dysmorphia at the beginning. One of the hallmark characteristics of that disorder is that if someone looks at themselves in the mirror, okay, do you think they take in their full image? Or do you think that their eyes zero in on the exact part of themselves that they're obsessing about? Right? It's so obvious that their eyes are really drawn to the exact thing. And guess what? Even if you don't have a formal diagnosis of this, I bet you do the same thing when you look in the mirror, right? We don't know how to take in the full kind of net impression of this human that we're walking out into the world with. We're zoning in on the thing that's making us a little crazy that day, the thing that we wish we could change. And that kind of that myopic perspective where we're like hyper focused on something that has not hit our standard is causing us to not fully embody the identity that we deserve to embody, okay, broadly. And the third thing, so we talked about being stuck in the past and then this perfectionism or high standards. The third thing that can cause this gap are what I'll refer to as blind spots. It's kind of the inside out versus outside in distortion. Okay. When you are looking at yourself from the inside, you know all of your thoughts and feelings that are associated with your current state. Whereas someone who is looking at you from the outside or observing your life from the outside, interacting with you from the outside, doesn't know those things. And that gap between things that you know that others do not, right? And then also things they know that you do not, they have a different perspective, causes this perception gap. So there's a classic tool, it's usually used in the world of communication called the Johari window. And if you Google that or look it up, you'll see this diagram that has kind of 4 quadrants. The 2 quadrants that are oppositional that I'm referring to are called hidden and blind. So your hidden identity is what you know that others do not, right? Your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your past experiences. And your blind spot is where others know things that you don't. Okay, so that the gap, the sort of the cross between those 2 quadrants is what causes a lot of this perception gap. It's why we sometimes just don't get it when someone is saying, you know, you're so good at this. And we're like, oh, how can you think that? Because we're carrying around all of this stuff that they don't see. And it's not always positive, right? It can go the other way. Sometimes we go, wow, they have a blind spot. Like they have an Achilles heel that they're not aware of. And they think they're great, right? We on the inside are like, I'm amazing. And other people can see this kind of blind spot that we don't see. But I'm talking about it from the other side, where our self-perception is more negative because in the women that I work with, this is a far more prevalent manifestation of this dynamic. Okay. So those 3 causes, being stuck in a past identity, having perfectionism or a really high, like almost unattainable standard, or this distortion that's caused by the gap between those blind spots, those are the things that create this perception gap. And it makes us, when we see ourselves as worse off than we actually are or than others see us, it makes us do 3 things. The first is we punish ourselves, right? We are critical little mean girls inside our heads all day, every day. At its worst, this leads to like self-loathing. where we are taken under by the level of criticism that we are just railing at ourselves throughout the day. And I know that that will be highly relatable to someone listening, right? If you are listening today and you're like, that is me, it is like a crippling level of self-criticism, right? Where you are punishing yourself daily for not being good enough, that will take you out. So if you know that that is resonant for you, I'm going to really encourage you to get some support around this pattern. Right. We talk about this inner critic all the time inside of Brilliant Balance. A good therapist is going to talk about this with you. It's so important that we learn to dig for self-compassion when we are in this cycle of punishing ourselves almost silently throughout the day. Sometimes we will punish ourselves in more physical ways. Right. So we will actually engage in behaviors that are punishing to ourselves, to our bodies, to our minds. But I really want you to pay attention if that is the level that you're operating at, because it can get so much better. Promise. Second thing we do besides punishing ourselves is we try to prove ourselves. So if you find that you are stuck in a cycle of overworking, right, to prove that you can, or people pleasing, right? I will do whatever other people want of me to kind of find that level of approval, or asking for reassurance all the time, right? From other people, like, does this look okay? Did I do okay in that meeting? These are all opportunities to prove ourselves, to have someone else tell us that we are doing well enough, and they can be really damaging. And the third thing that we do is we play small. This is where we hide out, right? We stay quiet. We don't try. We're like, you know what? I'm not good at that. So I am just not even going to try. I'm just going to stay over here where it is safe and small and where no one is going to criticize me and bother me, because I'm doing enough of that to myself. Thank you very much. Okay. So when I'm here saying we are all about possibilities in this chapter and being brilliant and figuring out how to fulfill your potential, any place you're stuck in this perception gap is going to be an impediment to your ability to do that. So this gap will make you punish yourself, prove yourself, and play small. And this is not the time for that. This is when we want to be playing big, right? We want to be fully embodying what is possible for us, right? The women who listen to this show, which means you, we are people who have a lot to offer. And we're going to have to make sure that we get out of our own way if we are going to offer that to the world. So what do you do? What do you do if you realize, if you're having that realization today, like, I'm stuck in one of these gaps. I understand that everyone is seeing things differently than I am seeing them in myself. What do you do? The first thing is to get really clear about defining yourself as you intend to be. Okay, connecting to sort of your highest and best self. What is the vision that you truly have for yourself? And making sure that there's a level of clarity about that it is written down, that you have it somewhere that you can reference it, especially on the days when things get a little rough. You want to have that to come back to. It's like your lighthouse vision for who you are or who you are becoming. And that is the definition by which you want to assess yourself. Not all of this critical nonsense that is rolling around in your head, but you want to be able to connect to that vision of yourself that you know you can be or that you intend to be. And then you get the chance to sort of bring her out into the world. Okay. If you're struggling to do that, the second thing you can do is kind of get the outside perspective, get the facts, or get some other people's opinions. Don't guess. Because left to our own devices, just a lot of noise is going to enter the system. So if you're like, I think this is true, but I don't have any data to objectively measure it, get the data, get the facts, figure out how you can assess. Let's take something like truly measurable, right? Like affluence or wealth. You can get data on how your income or your net worth stack up versus published data on the population at large. Again, please make sure you're looking at a broad perspective. You can get perspective on your body. in ways that are objective and data-based instead of being stuck in your head. That data, both objective facts and other people's perceptions, will help you calibrate your own to see if there's a match. If there's a match, if your own perception is matching reality, it's matching other people's perspectives, then you don't have a perception gap, right? You may actually have an area that you want to work on or put some effort against, but I'm focused on the places where there is this gap. And the third and maybe most powerful thing that you can do is to channel an alter ego. So years ago, I had Todd Herman on the podcast. Maybe I'll link that episode. And Todd was talking to us about this idea of leveraging an alter ego. Now, Todd works with elite athletes. That's his kind of specific niche that he works within. And he has shared a lot of great stories on my show and elsewhere about the way he uses an alter ego to help athletes through this perception gap, right? Sometimes we have to actually channel like a part of ourselves that's able to stand in our most powerful version of ourselves, our highest sense of self-worth, to be able to really break through. And so if you have not done that, have not connected that intentional vision that you have of yourself to a little bit of an alter ego that you can use when you need to, right? When you need to push through some of that noise, that is a very, very powerful tool to put in your toolbox. So Todd's not the only person who talks about it. His work is kind of seminal on this though. And I think listening again to my previous episode with him, which we'll link in the show notes, that'll probably make it easiest, or just Googling him, Todd Herman, and finding some of this training on alter egos, I think can be so helpful in helping us step toward the version of ourselves that's already out walking around in the world. We just haven't caught up with her. Okay. And one of the most powerful things that you can do is to catch up your current perception of yourself with where you actually are, because I bet you've come a lot farther than you're giving yourself credit for. And if you can claim that, claim all of that growth as your own, you can use it to fuel the next chapter. Okay. That's all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.